Hello, and you are listening to the Full of Chit-Chat podcast. You may be listening to it, I mean, if you're listening to it right away, and by right away, I mean in relation to my own perspective. Obviously, you're listening to this right away from where you're sitting. But if you're listening to this in the week of February 22nd, then you're probably listening on Substack, Charlie Demers' Substack site. But if you are a new listener listening on Harbinger, the Harbinger Network, welcome. And my thanks to producer Andre Goulet. Andre, who I've worked before on multiple podcasts, and very excited to be working with again. And so, and very excited. You have heard all of the, you're up to date on all of the past episodes we've done. But if this is your very first episode, you are in for a treat because we are talking to one of my very favorite people. He is a political writer, an author, a science journalist, and just all-around terrific person, and someone who I was thinking about recently, and I'll explain why in a second, but not before I have introduced him and let you hear his voice from Victoria, British Columbia. It's Leigh Phillips, everybody.
Hi there. This is my voice.
It certainly is, and whilst you're speaking, my schnauzer is very delicately tipping around the room on the edge of her nails, and so there was a little sort of castanet sound that will hopefully provide a very elegant bed for your introduction, just from an audio perspective. There's this old, we know well the apocryphal quote that's usually attributed to Frederick Jameson, although I don't know that there's any actual data on this. But the quote is, that right now it is easier to imagine the end of the world than the end of capitalism, right?
Right.
And so we now have had this multi-front miracle on the vaccine break. And now it feels like the dysfunctional organization of our societies is on pace to potentially sabotage the unfolding of that process. And suddenly it's like watching the Jameson quote in real time.
No, the incredible cooperation, the selfless cooperation between researchers around the world is, it's in the past year on so many different fronts, but including not least on the development of the vaccines is remarkable, and it is a sort of glimpse of a better world, a more humanist world, more egalitarian world. And the irony is here is that even though you'll hear libertarians or right-wingers talking about how the Pfizer vaccine and the Moderna vaccine, AstraZeneca vaccines are we should be cheering the free market. Look at how rapidly these companies were able to produce these vaccines. The truth is actually completely the opposite.
You sound like Slavoj Žižek.
Yeah.
You have to do it with it. No, it is, in fact, it is precisely the opposite. that Pfizer and AstraZeneca and so on and so forth, they are in fact now the opposite of the private sector and so on and so forth.
Yes. No, that's absolutely true.
The king of the moist talking.
Little joke there for the Canadians.
Sorry.
Talk moistly. But yes, so the way that these were able to be developed was that one, on the back end, you have all of this public funding for the research and development, and then in addition to that, you have effectively public funding of the clinical trials, and you have the crucially advanced purchase agreements by governments with these companies. So that they had completely de-risked the innovation. They had said, don't worry, even if they don't work, some of them don't work, we'll still be purchasing these, which suddenly now creates that market incentive.
Right.
Or rather creates an incentive, but it's by government. So the irony is that it's very much an example of socialism rather than an example of the free market working as it should. And then so we have this unprecedented speed with which these vaccines have been developed in basically 9 months, when normally it would take years, even decades for vaccines to be developed. And then around Christmas time, everybody's getting very excited that the crisis may be coming to an end soon. And then what do we see? It's February now. It's late February, and other than a handful of countries like Israel and the United Kingdom, the vaccine rollout has been completely challenged by once again issues within the free market in terms of logistics of the rollout of the materials that go into the production of these. Within Canada, one of the biggest problems we've seen here, and we're, as you know, we're one of the worst countries in the Western world in terms of the role of the vaccine, is that we have no domestic vaccine manufacturing, or not very much domestic manufacturing capacity. When going and speaking to pharmaceutical companies to ask if they would set up shop in Canada, the pharmaceutical company said, there's no point. Your population is too small, i.e., there's not enough of a market here. If we started producing them and then everybody takes them, and then a year later, but nobody's using that drug anymore because everybody's cured, then we have all this excess capacity, and it makes no sense for us to do that. And there were public health officials who were warning that this was a problem coming down the pike in Canada. Canada's particularly under the gun here because it's like 36 million. That sounds like a very sizable population, but these days in the world, comparatively, it isn't. Mm-hmm. And we're slammed as well because as a result of globalization, or neoliberal versions of globalization, a lot of our manufacturing capacity has really declined, not just with respect to vaccines, but in general. And there were warnings under from public health officials under the Harper administration saying, look, if we're hit by a pandemic, we're going to be squeezed in terms of our ability to manufacture sufficient vaccines or antivirals. And then when the Trudeau government came in, the same people were making the same argument, and again, there were other priorities made. So, and I think part of it isn't, we can say that, Trudeau or certainly Harper have a sort of, maybe they're, think of certainly Harper as a sort of nefarious figure, but it's more that it's just this sort of capitalist realism, this neoliberal mindset that why on earth would the state build out sufficient vaccine manufacturing capacity just to be there, like the fire brigades, where firefighters, they sit around most of the time, pay to sit around for those few moments where they do need to save people's lives. Why the fire brigade service could never work from a market sort of design, market structure. Of course, the Tories wouldn't think about that, but I think, of course, also the Liberals wouldn't think about that. And to be really honest, I think even, of course, neither would the NDP, because it's just beyond their thinking, right, that what we might need to be doing is creating a domestic vaccine service.
So many of the basic planks and principles of the economic political system that's ruled the roost of the planet over the last 40 years have just been laid bare as just absolute nonsense. Just made a complete travesty by this pandemic. I mean, one, the idea that it doesn't matter where stuff is made, it'll get to you. Two, the idea that, there is no society, it's just you and your family, and that'll be okay. You'll be able to take care of and manage that sort of atomized unit as you go through a civilization. One of the few promises that globalization, a capitalist globalization of the late 20th and early 21st centuries was somewhat able to deliver on. Now, partly they were able to deliver on this by just what they did to demolish the standard of living in the rich world of working class people, but they were able to slightly begin to redress some of the inequality globally that existed between. I mean, obviously, these are still completely out of whack in terms of the global north and the global south, or whatever the terms you use for the wildly uneven and exploitative division of labor and resources around the world. There was some movement over the last few decades towards beginning to redress some of those imbalances, and now it's looking like the new inequality of vaccine and inoculation is potentially going to completely throw the wrench even in that. I mean, where we're looking at, one part of the world that's maybe going to be all vaccinated by Christmas, if you're, in the lucky parts, and the rest of the world that's maybe, not going to get inoculated until 2024, 2025.
Yeah. No, it's grotesque. It's absolutely grotesque. And also irrational from an epidemiological point of view, because so long as the virus continues to circulate and evolve, even those people in the rich world remain in danger.
Thanks for listening to the Full of Chit-Chat podcast, hosted by Charlie Demers from the shores of beautiful Trout Lake in East Vancouver, in unceded Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh territories. Full of Chit-Chat is a product of charliedemers.substack.com, where you can subscribe for exclusive new writing weekly, essays, reviews, and humor. The podcast is produced for the Harbinger Media Network by Andre Goulet. Visit harbingermedianetwork.com to find fantastic progressive programs like the outstanding Oats for Breakfast and other listener-supported podcasts transmitting from the world to come.